Hey, you're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. As today marks the start of the 9th East Asia Summit in Myanmar, a meeting of leaders from across the Pacific Rim, top Myanmar officials are coming under heavy scrutiny in a new report released last Friday by human rights researchers at Harvard Law School for the execution, torture, and enslavement of civilians by military troops. Myanmar's own security forces are also being accused of profiting off of Rohingya asylum seekers fleeing Myanmar by demanding payment from them, according to a briefing released last Friday by the advocacy group Fortify and reporting by the Associated Press. Joining me now to discuss each of their findings is Matthew Bugher. He is a global justice fellow at Harvard Law School and the principal researcher with the Human Rights Clinic. And we're also joined by Matthew Smith, the founder and executive director of Fortify. Right. Welcome. Matthew Smith, I'm going to start with you. What exactly is going on here?
Yeah, so our findings relate specifically to the trafficking and smuggling of the Rohingya Muslim population. We've documented human rights violations perpetrated against the Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State for abuses that have been taking place for a very long time. And right now what's taking place is the mass exodus of Rohingya from Rakhine State, essentially in response to severe human rights violations that they're enduring, deprivations in humanitarian aid, restrictions on freedom of movement. Essentially, it's a state-sponsored discriminatory effort that's pushing the Rohingya out. But the new information that we've released on Friday involves the Myanmar authorities not only making life so intolerable for the Rohingya population that they're forced to flee the country, but they're actually profiting off of it. And so we've documented how
are they profiting off of it? Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So it's essentially the Myanmar Navy, various Myanmar state security forces. There's a riot police called the Lamont, the police department, the army. Essentially, the whole gamut of state security forces in Rakhine State are taking payments not only from Rohingya themselves before they flee, but also from members of transnational criminal syndicates who are trafficking the Rohingya out of Myanmar. So essentially, they're supplementing their incomes on the backs of the Rohingya asylum seekers.
Talk to me about who the Rohingya are, though. One thing that we're trying to make sense of is why they're the object of such persecution, such scrutiny, such state violence, as opposed to other minority groups, as opposed to other sects.
Sure. The Rohingya are an ethnic and religious minority. It's a Muslim population of, by the best estimate is roughly 1.3 million. That number is difficult to determine, though, because they've been excluded from the national census. This is a Muslim population. The government of Myanmar has, for a long time, denied the existence of this ethnic group. Essentially, what they claim is that they are interlopers from Bangladesh, and they refer to them as Bengali. And so part of the problem is the fact that their ethnicity is denied by the state and by the most of Myanmar society. But beyond that, it's a stateless population. It's actually the largest. Myanmar hosts the largest stateless population in the world, and that's primarily comprising Rohingya. So it's a population that's faced abuses for many, many decades, and over the last 2 years, the situation has seriously intensified. And this is, of course, in complete contrast to the dominant narrative of positive political change in Myanmar.
Absolutely, and this is an interesting sort of dynamic. The idea of statelessness in the international context is seen as not just a problem, but a violation of international law. So everyone is entitled to belong to some nation state, no?
Absolutely, and I think one of the principal problems with statelessness, or one of the more difficult aspects of statelessness, is that it involves a cascade of other human rights violations. This is a situation, however, that if the Myanmar government wanted to end statelessness in Myanmar, they could do it. They could amend the 1982 citizenship law, which is what we're advocating for. It's what every single UN human rights special rapporteur on Myanmar has advocated for since the 90s. A number of governments have pointed out how this citizenship law is in contravention of Myanmar's international legal obligations. Solving the statelessness issue certainly wouldn't be the silver bullet for the Rohingya population, but in the least, it would give them some status. It would give them some freedom of movement and some other rights to which they're entitled to.
And what are the options here? And I'll bring Matthew Bugher in a minute, but what are the options here when you have a kind of de jure statelessness?
Well, I mean, I think certainly for the Rohingya, they feel as though they don't have any options, and I think that's partly why we're seeing so many take to the sea. The best estimate is that
I'm sorry. Let me ask it. I'm sorry, Matthew. Let me ask it differently.
Yeah.
What are the options in terms of how to redress this? Because you can give them kind of doctrinal statehood, right? But that doesn't stop, as you pointed to, that doesn't stop the kind of repression that we see. That doesn't stop the day-to-day persecution that they see, and it won't stop them from not only wanting but needing actually to flee. We see this we've seen this in Kuwait and other places where you have these stateless bodies of people who then are either option to buy citizenship other places, even just for paper purposes. Some people leave and find areas that build them. Obviously, in the middle of the 20th century, we saw people create states for folk. What do we do here? What's the best option here, or what are the best options here?
Well, I think the best option is that the government of Myanmar change its policy and change its specifically the citizenship law. More pressure needs to be put on the authorities to do this. When the violence first started in 2012, I was there shortly thereafter. Villages were being burned down. What started as clashes between Buddhists and Muslims just graduated into this campaign of ethnic cleansing that we're seeing today. And back then, the president of Myanmar's initial response was to send all of the Rohingya to what he referred to as a third country, which implies that Myanmar, he did not believe Myanmar was their first country, but rather their second. And this is just not an option. The UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency, has repeatedly told the government of Myanmar it's not going to participate in creating refugees. In other words, they're not going to assist Myanmar to expel this ethnic and religious minority from the country. So the solution is really in Myanmar. And that's why actually this week is so essential, because ASEAN leaders, President Obama and others are descending on Naypyidaw to discuss this issue. And it is a regional issue.
A regional issue indeed. Matthew Bugher, you also have a report. You focus slightly differently here. Talk to me about these three officials who have been targeted for some sort of, punishment, some sort of investigation.
Yes. So we've conducted a 4-year investigation into a military offensive which happened in the eastern part of the country beginning in late 2005. And what we documented was attacks on civilians with heavy weaponry and small artillery, the burning of villages, torture of villagers, the use of civilians as human shields and human minesweepers, and a lot of other forms of abuse. And what we concluded was that these actions constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity under international criminal law. And we identified 3 senior commanders who could be held responsible for these crimes. One of them is the Home Affairs Minister, and the other 2 are in prominent posts in the military.
You talk about the attacks being widespread and systematic.
Sure.
Talk to me about what makes them systematic.
Sure. We also documented military policies which sanction the targeting of civilians. So to be very specific, in Myanmar, there's been a long-standing practice of labeling certain areas as black areas. And I personally spoke with soldiers who said that they were given orders that in black areas, everyone was to be considered the enemy. And that essentially created free fire zones in those areas where military would shoot on sight at civilians. So that's some of the systematic nature. We're saying this derives from long-standing military and policies and practices, and it had a huge impact and a devastating impact on the civilian population in that area.
You presented your report to Kyaw Nyunt, the Deputy Defense Minister and a Major General.
Yes.
What kind of response did you get?
So First of all, I would like to say that it is remarkable that I was able to have that meeting. And we had a conversation for more than an hour, which dealt with the substance of our report. And that's a really positive step, because that kind of conversation wouldn't have been able to happen 4 years ago. And we're hoping that we'll be able to have more conversations. That said, the response was denial of the findings of the report. The Deputy Minister of Defense said that our findings were one-sided, and he said that they were just inaccurate. He denied that the policies which we documented are in place. So I'd say it was encouraging that we were able to have the conversation, but discouraging that denial is still their response.
Myanmar, correct me if I'm wrong, abandoned military rule in 2011, maybe?
Yes, that's correct.
How does this continue to happen?
Yeah, so, in many ways, what's happened in Myanmar is remarkable, what's happened in these past few years. But there's an elephant in the room, and that's the military. And there's a refusal by politically engaged parties to address ongoing military conduct and ongoing human rights abuses by the military. And we're calling on the international community to not be swayed by the government's rhetoric that military conduct is just off the table in conversations about reform in Myanmar.
Last question for both of you, very quickly. President Obama is in the region. There are many people who are now calling for greater attention, greater intervention, some sort of United States response. What can we do? What should we do? Matthew Smith, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a good question. I think we can't underestimate the political, economic political and economic leverage that President Obama brings to Naypyidaw. So it's essential that he and his team capitalize on that leverage to advance the promotion and protection of human rights. Now, for an ethnic and religious minority like the Rohingya, many people are just hoping that he'll say the name Rohingya. And indeed, it would be morally appalling, I would say, if President Obama failed to prioritize the situation of the Rohingya. But beyond the leaders in Myanmar, I think he also has an opportunity to discuss these issues with leaders from around the region of Southeast Asia, and that's essential. But some of the core recommendations we're calling for involve independent investigations into these human rights violations, international investigations, because the government of Myanmar has conducted its own in Rakhine State, and they've been deeply problematic. So there's a lot, I think, that President Obama can bring to the table in Myanmar.
Matthew, I'll give you the last word.
Sure. We just as Matthew Smith said that President Obama should be addressing the issues relating to the Rohingya, we also think that there's issues relating to armed conflict and the military's conduct, especially in ethnic areas, that need to be addressed. And those issues are not being discussed enough right now. There's a tendency to speak about armed conflict in Myanmar as a political issue that could be solved through the peace process. But what we're calling for is to address military conduct as a human rights issue, and that there be serious action to address military conduct in the country. And we really hope that on this visit by President Obama, that he raises those issues and makes sure that there is a discussion about those issues going forward.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll continue to follow this here at HuffPost Live, and we thank you both for your insight.
Okay,
thanks very much.
All right, for more information on what's going on with the Rohingya and what's going on in Myanmar, stay with us here at HuffPost Live. Much more coming up.